you. Thank you very much. It's good to be here today. And today's topic is tent making as mission. And we're going to be dealing with professional people, business people, students, and retirees who go to countries where mission work is not legally permitted and go to those places on the planet where the name of Jesus is not yet known, nor have they ever met a follower of Jesus personally. So we are trying to get people to go to this area for the completion of the missionary task. The first session is an introduction, and when it's over, if you don't want to continue for the second session, feel free to leave. I will not be offended. The second session will be dealing more about what is the actual process, how do people prepare to go. So you have your options. Again, thank you for coming. We're going to look at tent making in the Bible, in the history, and what it is like today, the greatest need, who is it for, and challenges and joys, preparation, resources that are available to you in learning more about tent making. First, we're going to look into the Bible. In the Old Testament, we had a lot of people who used their professions as a means to go to another culture, another country. We're not going to go through all of them because this would be a very long time otherwise. So just know that this is a biblical concept. It is not something modern and new. We are looking way back into the Old Testament. In the New Testament, of course, we get the term tent maker from Apostle Paul, whose trade and profession was that of a tent maker. And because Paul was a tent maker, as were Aquila and Priscilla, he stayed and worked with them at their tent making business. Now that's the amplified version. I love the introduction about Paul because his name was Paul and his profession was tent maker and he was from Tarsus. Do you know that when you go to a new culture, one of the most key things people want to know about you, what is your name? Where are you from? What do you do? So in this very, very short Bible verse and what we know about Paul, we get all that information that is so key. The question in mission circles in a lot of people is, well, how much work did Paul really do? Because he was also an incredibly efficient missionary, and churches at times were supporting him with money. I'm sure if that's the question you have in your mind, you're also aware that there are times when Paul says, please don't give me money. So we need to establish that Paul used his work as a strategic plan for sharing the gospel quickly as he moved from place to place. Being a tent maker in that era meant you could go to any new community and you would have a job because it was one of the most in-demand jobs at that time. But did he work full-time or did he dabble at work whenever it suited him? We have a few Bible verses that I will let you yourself decide. These hands of mine have supplied my needs and the needs of my companions. Now, if you are working so hard that you're also paying for the rent or lunches of your coworkers or your friends, obviously part-time work is not quite going to cut it because you are providing for your whole team. And another Bible verse is, we work night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel. I don't know about you guys, but working night and day doesn't sound like part-time work to me. It sounds like he was very focused. And while we preach the gospel, while at work, which today is the exact way that tent makers share their faith in these countries where quite often it is not permitted to bring up the topic of your faith, where it is not permitted to initiate conversations about your faith, where you honestly cannot rent a building and then start church. That just simply would not be permitted by the rules of your job contract and also by the rules of the country. In the recent past, we have William Carey. He was known as the father of modern mission. He was also a businessman, botany expert, professor, author, and translator. He apparently translated parts of the Bible into 35 different languages. He was the modern era tent maker. And he said this, every missionary ought to maintain a trade. What he was simply saying, missionaries should also be able to do work when required, when needed. A little bit closer to our era, Ruth Siemens. She was a tentmaker pioneer of this modern era. She founded Global Opportunities, authored most of the tent-making articles on the internet. If you search articles on the internet today, most of them will have been authored by Ruth Siemens. And she defined tent-making for a new generation. Today's tent makers, and because John was an English teacher, as were James and Nora, he stayed and worked at their English school. Do you notice the similarity to Paul's? So James and Nora are the believers who own a business called an English school, and they have hired John as a teacher, and together they are preaching the gospel through their work, just like Paul did. Tentmaker Today, as we research them and we listen to them when they come back, we try to find out what motivated them to go so that we can motivate others to go. We found these points about them. They had a desire to make their lives count for something. They were uncomfortable about fundraising. We know that the traditional missions model, Lord bless it, there's nothing wrong with it. It is one big part of missions, requires today a lot of money. Some have said it takes about $200,000 these days to launch a missionary couple. So due to lack of funding, many people simply feel that they are not equipped to go ask people for money. They felt called to missions but had not found a way to get there. It is hard to have in your heart a calling or a feeling that you could be doing something for God's kingdom out there somewhere, but now you can't figure how to get from A to B. You know, that could be a real problem. You really want to do something, but you can't figure out how to get there. So tent making is that bridge that allows you to do that. These people were generally appreciated and had a healthy relationship with their home and sending churches. They had a sense of adventure and were interested in working abroad for a time. Now, we need to highlight this one. Tent makers do much better when they have a sending church, when they have a church that blesses them and sends them and commissions them to be their emissaries. That to know that you have a home church back home who is remembering you in prayer, who considers you one of them, even when you are far, far away and cannot even openly communicate with your church. You will never see a tent maker's newsletter on the church bulletin board. It is very difficult because sometimes people forget that they even have these tent maker missionaries. So it is really important that the sending church maintains that relationship and maintains a prayer watch over them. I am currently working on an article, just from the sayings. I had asked a number of people that what was the hardest thing that you heard when you came home from having been a tent maker. It's quite an interesting list. I will just tell you a few of them. Where have you been? We haven't seen you in church in a long time. Are you still walking with the Lord? Or, oh, it is so good to see you back in church again. Did you go to another church? And so on. Can you imagine you have been out there among the unreached people, some of the hardest people to reach for the Lord. You've been out there for a few years. You've seen God do amazing things. You've seen miracles. And then you come home, you're pretty excited about it. And then your church has this kind of memory of you. Now, we trust that that doesn't happen in your case because you know how to prepare well that this would not happen. Tent making, we look at it as the concept. It is like an umbrella. It is divided into 3 different categories. We have professional people, we have the engineers, the teachers, we have healthcare workers, and the list is endless of professions. They are tent makers. Then we have university students. Did you know that students can go abroad and study for a semester or 2 in these closed countries, and hopefully then while they are there in the university environment, share their faith with other students? We also consider them tent makers. Currently, we know about 50 students who are doing this in very, very close countries. And then we have business people, popularly known as business as mission people. They go and establish businesses that make money, number one. They give them business licenses and a legal right to be in the country. And they hire local people, they train local people, they give them advances in their education, they teach them the language, and they bring seen value to the community. They are appreciated because of all these visual things that they bring. However, deep inside and very openly, they are also there on behalf of God's kingdom. So they do not hide the fact that we are Christians or that we have a biblical mandate. Often they will even put it in their work contracts that this company is built on biblical principles, simply to make it transparent what their purpose is. But first of all, they are there to provide jobs and to bring value to the community. There's a disclaimer here. As long as all these people are committed to making Jesus known to the local people. There are a lot of Christians who go overseas to work. Their jobs change, they get sent by their companies, and they love the Lord, but they did not go overseas with the purpose of making disciples. They went overseas to work as Christians. Nothing wrong with that. We should do that because sometimes it's good just to have a Christian presence. But however, when we talk about tent making, we talk about the deliberateness of it, the intentionality. So why do we need tent makers? 1/3 of the world remains outside of the traditional missions reach. These are the countries that also are problematic in other ways. There are no visas available for Christian workers or for any kind of religious workers. So these are the countries where most likely no one you meet has ever heard of Jesus or do not know who he is or have definitely never met a follower of Jesus in their everyday life. So the 2/3 is yellows and greens. That simply means that these are the countries where people have access to the gospel. It doesn't mean everyone has become a believer. It means that they have access to the gospel, most likely more ways than one. If we were to count tonight, how many ways can we find the gospel message if we really want to find it here in this city? It's incredible. Bibles are everywhere. You can go to a motel if you want. There's a Bible there. There's just unlimited ways. There are churches on so many places. There are Christian books you can get. It's just, it goes on. And most likely, if you really want to find a follower of Jesus, you can find one. It wouldn't be that difficult. However, in the red zone, these things are simply not available. I have just recently come back from a country where not even your personal Bible was allowed. One of the first questions they asked, "Are you carrying a Bible?" And I said, "No, I'm not," because it was on my phone. So I thought I could kind of get away with it. And they said, "Can we check your bags?" I goes, "Absolutely." And they didn't. But the question there was, this is a country where tourists come. How you are limiting tourists from coming here because some people don't even want to go on vacation without their Bible. And the man said, "We don't really care. We just don't want Bibles coming to this country." So this is the reality of the places where tent makers today work. So these areas, we call them restricted areas where no religious workers can enter. However, we as tent makers look at no restrictions. Christian professionals are welcome. Let's look at another way of it. Unreached peoples, they have little or no access to the gospel message. And they almost certainly do not have access to someone who is a devout follower of Jesus. No visas. And of course, missions donations are dwindling, which is adds an urgency to, we have a world to win for him, and we need to find a way, even though donations are dwindling. Tent making makes missions available to all believers. It's the great equalizer, I like to say. If you want to share the gospel somewhere, you can do it. If you have a profession that you are able to find a job in another country, you can be God's emissary. And it makes it available for everyone who wants to do this. One more. You've all heard this saying, I believe, why should anyone hear the gospel twice as long as there are still people who have yet to hear it once? I remember seeing this thing really a long time ago, this saying, and really being struck by it. This was way before my personal missionary career became relevant. This one really bothered me. You know, every one of my friends had heard about Jesus. And yet we were telling those same people over and over and over again about Jesus, and no changes were happening. So there, in the Western countries and in the non-restricted countries, the gospel can be overwhelmingly available to people, to a point where people have turned their back at it because, oh no, not another Christian. They've been poisoned and they've been really pushed back from even wanting to hear testimonies. So what remains is a place on the planet where people have yet to hear it once. Do you know, when you go to a place where no one has ever heard about Jesus, the most delightful thing is that you may never have been able to share your faith at home. You've tried and it's failed and people don't want to know, and they tell you, good for you, not for me. You know all the answers why people don't want to hear. I'm glad that's working out for you. You know, everybody should believe whatever they want to believe. All this wonderful stuff, but you really can't share about your own faith. Nobody is really interested. Now you go to a country where no one has ever heard about Jesus, and not only do they want to hear about it, they drag it out of you. I have a friend of mine who's been 16 years in a very closed nation, and he said, back home, I am useless to talk about my faith. Over there, I am the Billy Graham. And I don't know what happens on that flight. I choke when I try to tell anybody about my faith back home. But over there, I am able to share about him every day. The world also needs to see a model of faith and work integrated. I believe the model that we have grown up with is not one of integration, but of separation. Tent making also abolishes the sacred and secular divide and blesses and shows a way that all work is God-honoring. Martin Luther once said, a dairy maiden can glorify God while milking cows. Now, we have never worked with somebody who's a dairy maiden in today's modern era, who has gone as a tent maker. But you know, your work is valuable to God. Do you love your work? No? Maybe yes? Have you ever considered that is a mission field that God has put in your life? Your workplace. I'll show you why we are not very good at this in a later slide. But who are not tent makers? Ruth Siemens said this: Christian professionals with overseas jobs are not tent makers unless they intentionally seek to make Jesus known to the local people of the host country. There's a lot of wisdom in this one statement, but I'm just going to pick on the part about the local people. If you go to a closed country where you have to live in compounds apart from the local people, you're not supposed to mix with the local people. Your easier to-go people groups are other expatriates who are also working there. Them you can hang out with. You can freely share anything you want with them. So that becomes the go-to ministry. I will just tell my Scandinavian friends or my friends from other open countries about Jesus because I have a desire to talk about it. I'm out here anyway. But you are excluded from sharing your faith with the local people. So tent makers must intentionally be focused on the people among whom they work and live. It's really critical because those other people have access to the gospel in their home countries. I'm not saying you shouldn't share your faith with just about anybody who comes your way, but tent makers need to have that intentionality of going to bless the nation where God is opening up a job situation for them. So we have students as tent makers. University areas are conducive and exploring of new ideas. Most home countries offer some kind of scholarships for you to go study abroad for a period. And it's a great cross-cultural experience and hopefully even prepares you for a future in missions. What are the challenges? They are many. I will just tell you of one of them. And those of you who have gone to university, a secular university, will know what it's all about. It's party central. You will be meeting with people from all over the world whose lifestyle and whose understanding of God is vastly different than yours. It's a time to explore. It's a time to try new things. And it is a very difficult surrounding for somebody who has come there for the cause of Christ. And this is the challenge that they need to be preparing for. Benefits of retirees. I love working with retired people, and it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm closing in on retirement age. I love it because they have some of the best ministries of any tent makers that I know. Simply, age is respected in these countries where the gospel is not available. Gray hair or no hair, I'm not going to pick on anybody in the audience here today. Doesn't matter. Gray hair is appreciated as a sign of wisdom. They're able to get jobs in those countries that cannot fully pay their wages and their flights and their rentals. So they can go to some of the countries where younger people who need their finances, need the finances to meet living standards, need to be met. You have a retirement fund which can offset the cost of living in low economy countries. Authorities definitely give more leeway to retired people. I simply do not know a single retired person that has been arrested or kicked out of a country for preaching the gospel. I'm sure it has happened, but I personally have never heard of it. Once upon a time, I took church leaders from New York to a close country for a familiarization trip, my first and last one. And I love going to these countries because I love to share the gospel with these people. However, this time I was the youngest in the crowd, and in a 10-day period, not a single person came to me and wanted to know if I believed in God. 10 days. That has never happened to me. It's usually an hour or two after I land in these countries that somebody is having a gone conversation with me. I was getting so upset because these church leaders were not exactly experts at sharing their faith. They were probably experts at running a megachurch. So they would always refer to me, Ari, could you tell this man? And then I would bravely step in to try to save their situation. And the people would push me away, says, you are too young. What can you know? We want to talk to these guys. For 10 days, I'm being subject to this, being sidelined because these older gentlemen have all the wisdom and I have none. So I made a commitment to never do this again. It was the worst trip of my life into one of these countries. Old age equals wisdom equals open hearts. Why do you think Bob and Faye were able to win so many people to Christ? Simply, it was because anybody younger would have been kicked out within weeks and would never have been able to enter again. What are the challenges for retired people? I have a list, and I wish I could have interchange with you, but how many of you believe me when I tell you that the number one challenge is leaving behind grandchildren? Anybody believe that one? Thank you. Thank you. I am a grandfather to a 3-year-old. And let me tell you, I now understand exactly how difficult it was for my parents when we left with their only grandchildren to become tent makers. I had no understanding of it back then. Now I do. So yes, it is very difficult. It is also difficult for the families that stay because losing grandparents at that crucial time is not something that they had looked forward to. How do they do ministry? How do these people do ministry when it is forbidden? The word that is actually used is, you are not permitted to proselytize. How many of you know how to spell the word proselytize? If you do, I'm pretty impressed. I've tried it a few times, and somehow my spell checker kicks in and fixes it for me. But it's an interesting word, and it appears in job contracts. It appears in verbally. Very often, you are not permitted to proselytize. Please sign here that you will not proselytize. Now, I'd like to ask you, how many times do you go out and walking in your hometown streets and say, I'm here to proselytize. Would you like to hear what I have to say? How's that working out for you? So I can very honestly say, I will not proselytize while I'm here. I have no problem saying that. I don't even quite understand the theology behind that. How does it actually work? But what I do is when people ask me about my faith, it would be rude not to answer. I have been told this more than once. I met the security official of a very close country at Amsterdam airport. I deliberately went and sat with him and had coffee. And he introduces me as the man who is in charge of foreign workers of his country. And I goes, oh, this is so wonderful for me to meet you, because I am the guy who prepares people to come and work in your country. And he goes, oh, that's wonderful. I goes, well, don't be too quick to say that, because the ones that I prepare are Christians. And he goes, oh. So we ended up having this uncomfortable conversation. So I said to him, I have a problem with your country. I'm safety in Amsterdam airport. There's video cameras. I'm feeling pretty safe. He says, I have a problem with your country. When Christian people come to work there because you need their expertise, you need their professions, you need them to fill the jobs, when these Christian people come there, you forbid them from sharing their faith. Yet, when you go to their countries, no one stops you from sharing your faith. So why can't you have a reciprocal agreement? And I guess I pushed some buttons, because he stood up and very angrily said, not even in my country is it illegal to answer questions. And said, could I have that in writing on your business card? He was not going to sign his business card with that. But did you hear what he said? Proselytizing is forbidden. Answering questions is not. And he even added, that would be rude. I love that. Can you work with that? Can you work with that in everyday life? Somebody sometime comes to you and says, what is different about you? Do you believe in God? Isn't it a great time to step up? And answering questions is easy. Starting a conversation about your faith is always challenging in our home countries. So what do? They pray a lot. One of the things that I hear in the feedbacks is that what they miss most about being a tent maker is how dear prayer was. And I really thought that when I come back home eventually from this job contract, I will continue this life of prayer that has become so delightful. And then a few months later, they realize they have gotten back into their old habits, and that wonderful prayer life that they depended on for every day has lost some of its flavor. So prayer becomes the key way of sharing your faith with people. And the fact that you're integrating your work and faith, what does that really mean? There is a model that we call tent faking, being a faker, where you get a job so that way you can legally enter the country, and then after work and on weekends you go to another city or another community and you start doing traditional or gospel work there. So what you've done is you've accepted the government's permission for you to be in the country. Their understanding is you have come here to work, that is your sole reason why you're here. But instead, you are taking advantage of that work visa to do mission work somewhere else. Now, I have a problem with that, because we are not living up to that. We are not being transparent. Our work visa is for a purpose. So when we integrate our work and faith, it simply means being a believer at work, which we should all be doing regardless of where we live. What does it look like? Simple like this. When it's time for meals, do you pray for your meal? Do you bless your meal? When a coworker is having a hard day, do you go by them and give them words of comfort? Perhaps bless them? Do you get involved in activities at work? Are you going over and above what's required of you simply because you want to glorify God who lives in you? These are the ways that we integrate our work and faith. I once worked for an airline in their parts department. And we had to run like crazy to get the part number from a shelf up in the third and fourth floor. And airplanes, like my boss said, airplanes do not make money when they're sitting on the ground. So everything was done on the run. One day I went running on the fourth floor down this long hallway to look for a part, and there was a huge oil slick right in the center of the hallway. Well, of course, just like everyone, I just stepped over it and continued. The next day, that oil slick was still there. The third day, this oil slick is still there in the middle. Now, why didn't anyone clean it up? Well, it was a union job place. There were cleaners whose job that was. Have you heard this before? So that was not the job of the parts department personnel. So I don't know how many days of jumping over this puddle, running over it. You know, it's a recipe for disaster. Eventually, someone is going to slip and fall. So I stopped, and you know what? 3 feet away was a drum for oil rags. 3 feet away. I grabbed one of those oil rags, I wiped it up to the best of my ability, and put the rag into the oil drum, and then quickly checked to make sure, was I caught doing this? I immediately felt good. Okay, I'm not patting myself on. I just had this moment of, I should have done that many days ago. And then I thought, why did you do that? It's not your job. No one's going to pat you on the back. Good job for cleaning that up. So why did you do it? I'm having this conversation with myself. And I believe I heard a smiling voice say, I saw it, and I am pleased. That was the defining moment for me in my work life, where work became a joy. Up until that very moment, going to work was, I can't believe the alarm bell. I have to go to work now. Driving to work, I saw no joy. The only reason I went to work was for a paycheck. That moment defined the rest of my life, where every job that I do now is done as unto the Lord. My first boss is not the guy who pays my bills. God is my first boss. That is the road to integrating your work and faith. They talk to their friends. They become involved with their friends' lives. They become involved with their birthday parties. They become a part of community. They go to weddings. They go to parties. They invite people to their home. They are hospitable. They invite people to their home often and intentionally. And when people are in their lives, they find ways to disciple them. Does that sound complicated? Would you like to go 3 years of Bible school to learn those points? Well, I've given you a quicker way to do that. Not that there's anything wrong with Bible schools. So let's look at this amazing chart. I did not invent this. This is the model that I personally grew up in, having grown up in church. You go to work from 8 to 5. Excellent. Let's get that out of the way so that after work, I can squeeze in some faith matters. Prayer study, prayer Bible study, worship evenings, youth nights for me when I was a younger person, and all the good things. So I'm going to use my work time so that I can fund my faith time. Hey, I need some money to bring the kids to a camp. You know, do you see this beautiful, incredibly, sharply defined day? And the two shall never meet, because my work is just a means to a different end. The challenges of today's tent makers, I interview and debrief and chat with every tent maker that I can once they return. We usually spend a day or two together if we can. And I want to learn from them how we can train next tent makers better. It is probably the most joyful thing that I do in my ministry. Hearing what their struggles are, and then preparing the new people. Okay, these are the things that people struggle with today. And we're going to show you how to deal with these challenges before you go. Isn't that cool? Like you just sort, I am just a purveyor of information. I don't have the intellect or the knowledge, but the people who are out there give it to me so that I can pass it on to the next generation. So, number 5, there's actually 13, but for the brevity, we're going to only cover 5 of them. Difficulties with bosses and coworkers. Anybody ever have this problem at home? No? Guess what? This problem is not going to go away. It will probably be multiplied. You work too many hours. Most contracts say that you're supposed to work 8 to 9 hours. In reality, people are working much longer hours. I'm so glad this never happens here in the West. Cultural frustrations. You are not only working with people of the host culture, you're dealing with other expatriates from other countries. One tent maker reported that in his work group were 21 different nationalities. And I forget how many different religions. But it was an incredibly challenging bunch to try to get tasks done with. So not only do you have to understand the host culture, who are the bosses, you have to understand everybody else. Now, of course, if you're the kind of person who enjoys cultural challenges, it can also be a joy. And a lot of people do say that one of the greatest things was meeting and working with so many different cultures. The reason tent makers go is that they hope to bring Jesus to the host people. They want to share their faith. That is their intent. And losing focus is very easy when you're having problems with your bosses, you're working too many hours, and you're frustrated by the culture. You see how quickly that focus can dim, and you can just simply realize that you don't have time. The number one, the largest problem for tent makers, which surprises people, are other people from other countries who are also working there. Why is that a problem? Well, if you are from Scandinavia and you're working in Hindustan, and your coworkers are from really strange cultures, but then one of those people is from Scandinavia, guess who you're going to end up hanging out with? You will always be drawn to the people who are most like your own culture, because you need to find that one comfort zone where it's cool to be. It's probably the same as regular work. You find the people that you enjoy being with, and then you have lunches and coffees with them most of the time. But it's detrimental to tent makers because the more you end up spending with people who are like you, the more time you are spending with them. And in my perspective, you are robbing the host people of your friendship, of your hospitality, of your possibility to share Jesus with them. Now, we also have joys. There's 11 joys that we have counted so far. Becoming friends with the people that you've gone to serve, it is a joy. You're getting to know a new culture, and you're entering their lives as a friend. I have tried to figure a way to get politically correct Westerners to ask me about my faith. Oh my goodness, that is the biggest challenge that I know of. To have a rational, reasonable conversation about my faith in the Western environment, it is so challenging. And it is so delightful when they come to me and ask me about mine when I'm over in these countries that I never want to leave. There's just such joy in sharing your faith with somebody who desperately wants to know about it, who's not just politely listening to you. Knowing you are where God has sent you, or God wants you, is an incredible joy in the times of challenges. Introducing Jesus for the first time is the greatest joy of the tent maker. Seeing somebody become a follower of Jesus, somebody becoming a disciple, is the greatest joy. Security issues. In all our training programs, obey the laws is central. Do not break the laws of the country. No matter how righteous you may feel that if I just do this one thing, God's mission will be sped up if I just ignore this one law. I have this opportunity. I know I'm breaking the law, but God rules above this nation, so therefore I will break the rule. Now, there may be instances where you feel that's okay, but as far as tent making goes, we have earned the right to be in these countries by contracts. We have signed contracts. We have agreed to obey their laws. In front of a holy God, I would say, do not break the laws. I recently spoke with a returned young lady. I'm struggling with telling you the name. Let's say it's the second most difficult country to be in as a foreigner, whether you're a Christian or not, where way too many people end up in prison, even when they're not believers. In her classroom was a policeman every day. Every 2 weeks, the policeman changed. Why? Because this is the way how the government ensured that you were not winning the policemen to Jesus. Because 2 weeks is all, get them out of there before they are indoctrinated by this foreigner. So every 2 weeks, the policeman changes. And in the classroom are hidden policemen who are just waiting for you somehow to start talking about the things that are restricted. Not only religion, you're not allowed to talk about life in your country. You're not allowed to talk about anything you own. There's a whole list of things you are not allowed to talk about, and you have signed that you will not. Well, this young lady was one of the most clever people I've met in a long time. Her strategy to her prayer group was, I will obey every law because I want to leave room for God's miracle. As she shares her story, she was praying for her students by name in secret. She was praying for the policemen sitting in her classroom in secret. She had listed them in her Bible so she could remember to pray for them. And she kept just praying and being obedient. All of a sudden, some months into this, the policeman stayed 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 2 months. And she's pretty smart. She says, okay, I asked God for a miracle. I have obeyed all the rules. Something is happening. Very shortly after the 6 weeks had gone by, the policeman comes to her. Could you tell me, is there a God? The policeman instigated the conversation of questioning her. Now, there could have been a chance that he was setting her up so that they could send her home. Very, very likely. But this young lady had prayed, and she had seen God already moving, and she boldly told him. After that, the policeman would start asking in class, so everyone would hear about her faith. What does it look like? Who is Jesus? And before long, the policeman had found Bibles for the class. The policeman, who is now will get killed if he's found out what he's doing. Absolutely. This is his last gig if he's found out. So a Bible study was born in her classroom under the supervision of the police, simply because she chose to obey the laws to leave room for God's miracle. Don't you love that statement? To me, hearing this story is just so awesome. Be transparent. No one should be a hidden Christian as a tent maker. You are a believer. You are a follower of Jesus, whatever term you like to use. We actually advise people to put it in their job application, somewhere in the job application. Many places they do ask, what is your religion? Be open. Tell them this is who you are. Be transparent. Do not hide who you are. The reality is, it is an increasingly unsafe world. There are no guarantees. I'm here to report that no tent maker I have worked with has been killed while they have been out there. Some have been hurt, some have been injured, some have been detained but not jailed. But it is an unsafe world, and we are not guaranteed safety no matter where we are. Leave room for God's miracles. Leave room for God to use your servanthood to his kingdom in this country. You have come there as his emissary. Allow him to be the boss. But, as the Bible says, be as wise as snakes and as innocent as doves. On our course, we deal with this issue of security quite extensively because we simply do not want anyone to make serious mistakes. So the practical benefits are most tent makers are paid well to extremely well. Children's schooling is usually covered, return flights are paid for, and there's always a benefit package and housing is provided. Some people literally want to be tent makers initially because they want to pay off student debts or they've gotten into debt. And people feel very, very hesitant to come to me and say, well, I initially started thinking about tent making because I am in debt. I need to pay that off. Is this okay? I goes, of course it's okay. God is not against you paying off your debts. And if at the same time God can use you to pay off your debt and you can share the gospel to people who've never heard about it, I say a win-win situation. So we do know of people whose initial reasoning had been to pay off debt, especially student debt. So the global job market, where obviously everyone goes, these are the biggest professions that are hiring people from around the world right now. ESL, teaching English as a second language, is so large that we cannot even figure how big this industry is anymore. So the demand for English teachers is the greatest, and I would say 7 out of 10 tent makers are English teachers. If you don't see your profession here, fret not. Let's look what the next one says. We have yet to find an occupation for which a job opening could not be found. So it's really exciting for me to see these incredible professions and passions that people have for their work being used for God's kingdom. Business as mission, short form is BAM. They impact whole communities by providing work. They employ people, and there's amazing freedom to do the mission. You notice that's the second part of the name. You can stay indefinitely. There are no restrictions. There are no job contracts for business people. The challenges are dealing with corruption, dealing with different cultures, having to make money to be relevant, having your church understanding that you're actually a businessman, but your primary goal is to do mission. Business people, when they return, so did you make a lot of money? No, but I started a church. Anyway, did you make a lot of money? It seems to be that the money issue has a way of clouding things. But I am so excited at the increasing growth of the business as mission movement. It is the fastest part of mission growing today. It is exponentially growing, and it's really exciting for me personally to be a part of that work. If you want to read, if this is something that interests you, I highly recommend that you read Londa Cope's book, TemplateInstitute.com, Old Testament Template. Businesses in other cultures that have the potential to revolutionize communities economically and provide platforms for spiritual revival. This is one of the most amazing books that I have read on this subject. I spoke at a church not too long ago, and one of the elders was in the meeting, and he went and bought this book for every leader on the church and gave it to them on Monday morning because he thought this is the best way for us to change the mission focus of our church. What's next? We put out a publication called Tentmaking Today. It does not belong to any one organization. We have 2 really great editors who write articles, and then a third one not so great, who's standing in front of you. But it's a short read. It comes out once a month. It's free. Please subscribe to that, because it will continue this information for you to learn about what tent making is, so that if you are interested today, it will keep your interest alive. You will also read some amazing stories of what God is doing. Perspectives, I heard that Kairos course had been run in the city somewhere. It doesn't matter what church it's in. I highly recommend it, that you take this course. The jobs are plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out tent makers into his harvest field. So our next session, we're going to have a short break, is about your next steps and what you need to know before you go. And if you are going to leave us at this point, just write down this website, tentmaking.org. It has incredible resources and links to the world of tent making, and we're continually updating that website. So the next session is based on an upcoming book called Journey to the Nations.